For years, Aperture has created some of the best lighting for studios and feature films. But we also know that not everyone needs a studio to create a film. Introducing Amaran. Meet the Amaran 100D, 100X, 200D, and 200X. 4 brand new lights that bring power, flexibility, and ease of use to the fast-paced world of content creation.
There's an old saying, many hands make light work. This couldn't be more true than with the latest addition to our range of support accessories, the iFootage Spider Crabs. An ingeniously designed set of support arms which go where you go, consistently and safely supporting your valuable equipment, providing you with the time, space, and freedom to create. Spider Crabs provide a reliable, modular system designed to support you, no matter where you find yourself working. This versatile system cleverly combines a variety of practical support options, providing you with even more creative choices and possibilities.
Our infinite capacity to problem solve has led us to develop the Shark Slider Nano, providing you with minimum form factor, flawless bi-directional 2-axis camera movement. Precision gesture control technology provides fast, accurate, reliable, and repeatable track movement, perfect for both interior and exterior location work. Minimum power consumption, exceptional runtime, and USB-C charging means you'll never miss a shot. Flexibility is key. Operate using either our IPS touchscreen or our standalone app. The Nano turns your smartphone into a powerful motion capture device packed with tons of features. The Shark Slider Nano. Dependable camera movement, whenever and wherever you need it.
Give me that microphone! Listen up.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Pro AV TV. Thank you very much for joining us for what is the last of our scheduled streams for Canon in Motion month. So throughout June, Canon have been running a month of promotions on pretty much everything cinema EOS, really. I suppose lenses haven't. There's been some cashbacks on it, even lenses. A huge bumper month of sales promotions, of ramping up the amount of content that we do on Canon, a Canon themed month, if you will, and we are coming to the end of it. So if you are looking at buying any Canon products, pretty much, make sure you check what those offers are and see if you are going to go for it. Try and do it within June, because you will save a decent amount of money on a lot of the kit that we're going to be talking about today if you buy it within June. So make sure you don't miss out on that. But for today, we are talking about the C300 Mark III, and I am joined by the lovely Mehdia Mattel. How are you, Mehdia?
I'm good, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
So the C300 Mark III, you know, that C300 range, it might be just because it was the first one that you announced in Cinema EOS, but I always think of it as the Cinema EOS camera. And then the others are sort of variations up or down, if you like. But I always think of this as sort of the heart of the lineup, if that makes sense. Do you do the same?
It was I think everyone's go-to cameras, obviously in 2011 when we launched the C300, and obviously that was the start of the Cinema EOS. Then just over a year later, there was followed by the C500. But yeah, the C300 Mark I, C300 Mark II, been very popular as well. And now we're up to the C300 Mark III, and I think people just, even when they refer to the camera, they just say C300 as if it's I think you in a way, it's almost like you know what they're talking about. Yeah. It is very flexible in terms of what the camera can be used, whether we're talking about the Mark I, the Mark II, and now with the Mark III that actually even offers even more than the previous 300s.
Yeah, so we'll chat through some of the differences between the Mark II and the Mark III. Although when was the Mark III actually released? It was about 2 years ago, was it?
Yeah, so that was April 2020, beginning of the lockdown.
Just over 2 years. Yes, I remember it actually. It was my first main camera review in lockdown, which was quite an experience trying to figure out how to do that. Courier dropped it on my doorstep when we were still treating other people as if they were the worst thing in the world. Like, get away from me. Yeah,
it was actually a perfect combination, because we launched the C300 Mark III and the CN10 as as well.
Yes, that didn't get dropped on my doorstep. But
no, unfortunately, you had the camera.
So yeah, the camera's a couple of years old now, but these cameras have a very long life cycle. So it's still, although it is 2 years past its release date, it is still very much a heart of the current camera lineup. So we're going to discuss the differences between the Mark II and the Mark III. We'll discuss a bit of an overview of the camera as well, and then we'll get onto the main focus of this live stream and this talk, which is, what do you get by stepping up to it? Because historically, the C300 has not just been the heart in terms of soul of the Canon lineup, it's also been the heart in terms of sales. You know, it's been the most popular choice, and then the other ones have been a bit more niche either side of it. Whereas that sort of shifted a little bit. There's been a really interesting trend over the last couple of years in the industry towards smaller, more capable cameras, and we're seeing cameras like the R5c and the C70 particularly just being so overwhelmingly popular, and for good reason. Those are incredibly good cameras, but there are still some things which you gain by stepping up in size to a larger physical camera like the C300 Mark III, because in the big scheme of things, this is not a large camera. You know, this isn't a big Ariel EXO or your C700, for example. This is still a very small compact camera, but you definitely gain quite a lot by making that leap between the C70 size and the C300 size.
Yeah, I mean, since we launched the C70 and the fact that the C70 shares the same sensor as the C300, I think there's been probably a little bit of confusion for those actually looking to get a camera, whether it be a C300 or a C70. Why should they pay more and go up to the C300 if they have the same sensor? And hopefully today we'll cover quite a few of the reasons why the C300 could be the perfect camera for them.
Absolutely. So as we go, I can bring up, like Barry says, afternoon, for example, I can bring up anything up on screen. So ask questions as we go, and we can divert the conversation as needed to answer any questions that you might have. Also, let's just start by letting us know who's watching. What kind of work do you do? What kind of cameras do you use? Who are we talking to? Say hi in the live chat as we go. I've got it here on the laptop so I can see it all as we go. So let's start with a very simple key features overview of the C300. What is the C300 Mark III, Mehdia?
Okay, I mean, I put a couple of pictures in there just to show examples of how you can set up the camera. So the smaller setup, and then the larger setup for larger productions with the expansion unit and other bits and pieces that we will cover. But get into the key spec. Obviously, with the C300 Mark III, it was the first camera where we introduced DGO sensor, or dual gain output sensor, delivering high dynamic range, better load-up performance in a Super 35 male 4K sensor. And as I said, so the C300 delivers 16 plus stops of dynamic range thanks to that sensor. You've got raw recording internally, because this is one of the differences if we were to compare it to the C300 Mark II, for example.
Yep.
The raw was an external option.
Yep.
You can do 4K up to 120 on a C300 III, and that's in XFAVC or even in RAW.
Yeah. And XFAVC in intra or longer, which is the big difference.
That's the other thing as well. Again, we'll touch up on that when we start comparing it with the C70. User interchangeable mounts. Again, this is a big bonus. Previously, you would have had to get that done in a service center if you were to buy an EF, replace it with a PL or vice versa. As long as you get the right mount, you can actually do that yourself. The modular design, so on the top of the base or the basic body that you get, you can actually build up the camera to suit the use or the production that you're going to be using the camera in, with expansion units, viewfinders, support for custom user LUTs, so you can actually upload your LUTs to use for viewing, because it has via firmware update now gives you the option to add or to basically bake in a LUT into your footage, similar to what everyone familiar with on the C70. You have support for anamorphic lens, 12G SDI, and then the fact that even though the camera is not as small and light as a C70, it is smaller and lighter than the C300 II, for example, if we were to compare the size and weight. So it's still considered lighter and smaller as well. And as I said, we have different configurations depending on how the camera is going to be used.
So should we maybe just talk a little bit more about the DGO sensor? Because that is, I know it's shared with the C70, but that really is the heart of these cameras. And for me is one of the main draws for people towards either the C70 or the C300 Mark III, because that sensor does work in a slightly different way to a lot of other sensors on the market, and has, I think, quite a cinematic, natural feel because of it. Could you just quickly explain what a DGO sensor is and what it does?
With dual gain output sensor, each image basically captured is going through two amplifications level, a higher one optimized for shadows, and then a lower one for highlights. So basically the camera captures as much of the details in the shadows as possible, while preserving your highlights. It's almost like live HDR, basically. This is the easiest way of describing it. And one of the benefits, obviously, is increasing the dynamic range that sensor can deliver. But you're also looking at the low light performance, so you will see less noise for those that actually shot previously with C300 Mark II, Mark I, or even C500. The raw out of the camera is actually cleaner than you would expect it to, even though we know with cinema raw light you still, or with raw footage, you're supposed to obviously apply noise reduction, but the footage is actually cleaner.
Absolutely. I think that from what I've seen has been the main, that and some nice highlight roller for the sort of the two main advantages of it, really, rather than expanding, because the C300 Mark II had a very good dynamic range, for example. And the C500 that doesn't have that technology has an incredible dynamic range. So for me, I think the main thing that I've actually noticed in the real world through using it is that lower noise floor. It makes a big difference. Everything feels nice and clean in the shadows, which means that you don't have to spend anywhere near as long working on anything to clean it up afterwards, really, and can clean it up if you need
you
to.
can still obviously do that, but as I said, if you start comparing it to other cameras, you will see the difference in when it comes to noise.
So DSA has chimed in with the C300 Mark III is great. We used 2 of them for a vegan cooking competition show called Peeled, which sounds great. 2 C300 Mark IIs, 1 C500 Mark II, and a C200. Super easy to work with. So a big collection of Canon cameras there. Wow, massive collection of Canon cameras. But yeah, of those ones, DSA, which ones did you prefer? Yeah, interestingly, because there's the C500 Mark II there, the C300, the C200, the C300 Mark II. Which ones did you were you happiest with? And a couple of questions. Dylan is saying, can I use a speed booster or adapter to use my full frame EF lenses to have the field of view on a Super 35 sensor? Not really, because the camera has either an EF or PL mount, which we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about adapting the camera and it being modular. There isn't currently an option to put anything with a particularly short flange distance on it, unfortunately, and you would need that to add the extra glass. So you'd want something with an RF mount from Canon's lineup, like the R5c or the C70.
C70,
C70. You have to use the R5c in crop mode to use it with that, but
I mean, we do have a wider range of EF lenses that you can use on the camera. So I guess it just, depending on the framing, just looking for wider angle lenses, I guess, if you're trying to get, or to capture more. But yeah, maybe in the future when the cameras we'll have more cameras with RF mount. Obviously, there'd be an option for that.
And James, absolutely, I agree with this point. The DGO sensor is the best sensor Canon has ever produced. Love the image out of it. I completely agree. I think it is a real... It's funny because whenever I do these technical comparisons and I bring pictures up side by side, it often looks soft. It often doesn't particularly wow in those technical side by sides when you're cropping into 400% and comparing images and all the rest of it. But in some ways, I think that might be why I like it so much. It feels very natural. It feels very detailed without being sharp. It feels very, very natural when you look at the noise floor and the highlight roll-off. Ollie Kensington talks beautifully about it. I wish I could talk about it as well as Ollie Kensington does. But
it's because, I mean, for Ollie, for example, it's the difference it made to his workflow as well. Because, absolutely. I mean, going from, spending less time editing and basically getting rid of noise and cleaning the image, DGO sensor just made his life easier and gave him even better looking images out of the camera.
So should we, a couple more questions and stuff are coming in, but let's go through these slides, otherwise we'll lose track of them.
So talking about the modular design of the camera. So as I said, as the basic unit, the camera comes with an EF mount. You do have the option to put PL mount. So this is something that now the user can actually do themselves. Literally all it needs is removing the 4 screws and just swapping the mount. We also have the EF Cinema Lock mount. Could be useful using the bigger or the larger cinema lenses. We also have an EVF V50. I don't know whether it's more of the forgotten viewfinder that we launched, which I think is great if you're using the camera, again, run and gun, just portable camera in your hand, and you want to have that flexibility swapping between a viewfinder and an LCD. It's great to use, obviously attached at the back of the camera, and you still have the use of the screen. There is another EVF that we'll mention later on, which is the EVF V70, that you'll use the same connection as the LCD. So you'll use a screen, but to use the V70. We also have 2 expansion packs, again, depending on the setup that you're using. So we have the smaller extension, a UV1, and then the larger, most popular one, the expansion unit V2.
V2. I think you've got a slide as well which talks about what's on those, haven't you? So let's just quickly go through.
So with the... let's start with, obviously, as I said, with the viewfinder. So extension unit 1, which is the smaller one. So again, if you don't want to add too too much to the size and the weight of the camera, but you need Ethernet, for example, or you need Genlock, then expansion unit 1 is perfect for that. You also get the remote B terminal, so that's for the RS422. And then going...
So where do you see this being used? This seems to me very much like a live production little module, if you're sticking this on a camera crane or something like that.
Yeah, so live productions, as I said, if you're mainly going to need that Ethernet, or if we're talking multi-camera setup, then you've got the Genlock option. Perfect for that. So smaller, lighter, and cheaper as well. And then moving on to the second or the larger expansion unit, that actually gives you quite a lot.
Yes.
So you get 2 additional XLRs for audio, as if the 2 built in not enough. You can have more.
And the controls for those, presumably?
Yeah. You can use, obviously, V-Lock batteries with that. You get D-Tab. You get Genlock. So the other 3 that we mentioned with the expansion unit 1, so you get the Ethernet, remote B terminal, and the Genlock. And then lens connection as well, if you're using the CN10, CN20, CN7, or any other B4 lenses. Yeah.
You really want this because of that lens port. And it's worth pointing out for anyone at home, there are a bunch of ways to get V-Locks onto the camera. This accessory is not just needed for that V-Lock play. If that's all you're after, there are loads of other.
Yeah, I mean, that is the Canon solution, but there are a number of third-party ones that actually will give you that solution as well. So. And
you get yet another row of controls
as
well, because there's already, I think, 3 on the camera itself, and in case you want a 4th.
It's more if depending on how you're using the camera. So on the shoulder, you've got those buttons closer to you, so it's easier to operate the camera as well.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I'm just flicking through to see if there's any more questions, because there's some great chat going on. Dylan says...
The one thing to mention is if you're using the EVF V50, you can't use the expansion packs because the connection is the same. Yeah. So you basically, I guess, depending on which is the main thing for you, whether you need... If the expansion unit is a must... Then the other way, if you need a viewfinder, then you either have the Canon V70, or there are various third-party viewfinders that you can use.
Absolutely. So Dylan says he has the C200, started his career with the original C300 Mark I, and thinks the C300 Mark III looks lovely. Is the C300 Mark III the sort of way you would go if you were going to be upgrading, Dylan, or would you go more towards the C70 out of interest? James has asked, Barry's answered this, but James has asked, is there any difference in terms of stretching the colours compared to the C70 in terms of wanting to match the grades of the 2 cameras? They don't only just use the same sensor, they have the exact same, in 25p anyway, they have the exact same record modes, they have the exact same colour gamuts and log curves.
Yeah, all the options. It's only, as I said, if you're recording, as you said, going over 25, that's where you obviously, because you do have the option to do XFAVC Ultra up to 120 on the C300, which you don't have that on the C70. So that's why, and then RAW again, up to 50 or 60 on the C70. You can go up to 120 on the C300.
Absolutely. DSA has chummed back in with a bit more information about his shoot. It says the C500 Mark II was his hero camera, Steadicam close-ups to food. Those C300 Mark IIIs had the Canon 17 to 120 servos with autofocus doing the coverage of everything. And the C200 was the stationary camera. He loves the C500 Mark II with its crisp image and shallow depth of field, but the C300 Mark III has a super clean image, almost surreal, clean shadows on that sensor. That's exact. There we go. Proof of what we were just talking about. That DJI sensor has a huge impact on how clean the shadows are, which is fantastic.
But then again, the cameras do work well together. So the C300 works well with the C500, the same way a C70 can work well with C300 III or a C500 Mark II.
Now, you're not going to be able to answer this. I know you're not, but James has put, what is the current state of moving the upper cameras like the C300 Mark III over to RF mount?
I mean, it will happen at some point, but exactly when it's not something that I'm aware of even. I mean, the future for us in terms of the lenses is going to be RF, obviously. But yeah, at some point we will have, I guess, a full lineup of cinema cameras with an RF mount, but hopefully with the option to use adapters, and just still for those that want to stick with EF lenses, to use EF lenses or other adapters for PL lenses. So.
Ernesto says, with the interchangeable mount, do you think it would be possible to have an RF mount on this camera eventually? I don't think it would be from physics.
Because of the flange distance, it
you'd
won't
have to go
work.
back inside the camera a little bit.
The lens will have to be closer to the sensor, and that's not physically possible with the that configuration.
Small flange distance mounts like RF or any of the other alternatives like Sony's E-mount, for example, they are fantastic, but they do open up problems for things like interchangeable mounts because they have to be so thin. Like those are the mounts, and the EF one is absolutely the thinnest one there. But if you try and picture that as an RF mount, it would literally be like 5 millimeters thick, and then you've got to completely redesign the housing on the front of the camera to accept one and be the exact thickness. That's a challenge.
It's easier when you've got a smaller flange distance and you're increasing it. So from using basically EF lenses on the C70 and the R5c, because obviously you're going from 20 millimeters to 40 with the adapter, and the adapter is the one increasing that distance. But when it's the opposite, it's not physically possible. So
absolutely,
the camera has to be basic. I think with an RF mount, you have the flexibility to go EF at PL, not the other way around.
Absolutely. Dylan's asked, I think this is more of a question to everyone else. He says, for those working in TV and broadcast, are you finding that producers are happy with you delivering any footage from Canon cameras? Or I guess he's implying they might be happier with footage from another brand. And Barry's actually put it's going well. The camera is used on shows like Bake Off, Sewing Bee, and Taskmaster and stuff. There's a lot of people using these in broadcast realms. And
I mean, for the C300 in particular, C300 Mark III was used in the Great British Bake Off, and I mean the feedback has been great from that. And then the C500 has been used in like Clarkson's Farm, for example. The C70 as well being used as a big camera, the C500 or BTS shots. So the whole lineup, I mean, from the R5c up to the C500, has been used in larger productions.
And I think especially with the XF-AVC All-I version, there's sort of very little that anyone, let's say there's a broadcaster out there that isn't familiar with it, there's very little that they could really object to. As you go between all the frame rates, it's the same. Yeah. You know, they work superbly in every single editing software. So there's not really a huge, I guess if someone only wanted ProRes maybe, but that doesn't really happen that much. So yeah, I certainly would recommend people not be worried about integrating it into broadcast workflows. That's what it's designed for. Yeah,
and if someone hasn't actually done it, then I'd definitely say try it and pick up one of the cameras and test it.
Yep. Absolutely. So, should we move on to anything else on the slides that we want to talk about?
I mean, this is just to basically give you an idea. It's starting with the box, basically. So the basic body, what else you can add to it. Even, as I said, adapted for like before lenses, the remote options to control the camera, the EVF V70 that I mentioned earlier. If you want to use the expansion pack at the same time, it's a popular combination with the C300 in particular, using the EVF V70 expansion pack too. And then, the different mounts, the shoulder support unit. So plenty that you can use on the 500 as well as the 300. So this is applicable to the C500 as well. And then again, just in terms of, it's easier sometimes to see it being used and to see how the camera can be used. Different examples in terms of different setups, and from the basic camera unit, as you can see on the top left image. I forgot where my left is to my right. So you can see that with the EVF V50 as well. on the camera and still using the LCD. That keeps the camera small and light. Using it on drones, or building up the camera with expansion packs and using it with cinema lenses.
Absolutely. Dylan's put he had been looking at the C500 Mark II, but the C300 Mark III looks like a more realistic camera for the content I typically get hired to create, which is marketing videos. I think that hits the nail on the head perfectly in terms of for the content you typically get hired to create. And I think that is something I run up against talking to customers a huge amount is what's the best camera? What camera should I buy? There is no best camera. You know, for some people, the C70 or the R5c is going to be absolutely the right camera that they should buy, and they should never go anywhere near this. There's some people that this is absolutely the right camera and they should never go anywhere near an R5c. Don't buy an R5c, buy this. It all depends on the work you do, on how you like to use your tools. And these are tools, to be really blunt with it, they are tools to make you money. These are professional tools. So buy the camera that's going to make you money. If this is going to make you more money than a C500 Mark II, buy this. You know, don't buy the C500 Mark II, or vice versa. And I think thinking about it in terms of marketing videos, the C300 Mark III has quite a few strengths. The biggest one to me is ramping up through the frame rates.
Yeah.
You know, marketing stuff loves slow-mo. There's no getting around. Marketing videos really like slow-mo. Even just for slides on product shots and that kind of stuff. It's such good quality now, you can slow it down just to smooth out your shot a little bit. It doesn't even have to be noticeably slow motion once it doesn't have to be a bird flying or anything like that. I really like the C300 Mark III for marketing videos, as I guess you can tell, because it's that and the C70 are the two that we actually use for our channel for ProAV's marketing videos for content. You know, this is incredibly practical for that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the C300, as you said, in terms of the recording options, because if we've said already that the sensor on the C300 Mark III and the C70 is the same, and the quality you get from both of them is amazing. It comes down to what else do you need, the frame rates and other options that you get internally, and then it comes down to the connections as well. We explained what you get with all the expansion units. That might be useful for the job you're doing. That you might, if you don't need that, then yes, there is a C70 for other stuff, or basically combining 2 or 3 cameras depending on the size of the production as well.
So we've reached the sort of halfway point, if you like. Let's change focus now and talk about the C70 and the R5c and this whole stepping up journey to the C300 Mark III. I sort of say some people are better off with those and some people are better off with these. How do you make that decision? You know, what do you get by going for the bigger camera that costs more?
I mean, let's put that on there just and then we can talk. So with the C70, as we said, you're getting similar image quality from the C70 compared to the C300 Mark III. More and more people prefer the smaller, basically the form factor, the weight and size of the C70. And since it's been out, especially since we've added the Cinema Raw Light option on the camera, we obviously became even more popular, because that means slightly even less differences between that and a 300 Mark III, because previously you didn't have Cinema Raw Light on the C70. So for those that want that small light camera, they're happy with obviously just having the HDMI. They're not going to be connecting anymore in terms of monitoring options. They're happy to use the camera as it is. The C70 is great. I mean, you can't fault the camera. But if you need, as we said, if you need to record XFAVC or All-I at higher frame rates, then you've got the C300 Mark III. The modular design, if you think you're gonna be using the cameras in different scenarios and different setups, the 300 will give you that flexibility with the expansion packs. even down to like user LUTs, for example, that you can actually upload up to 4 user LUTs. It could be one going into your main screen, one going into the LCD, one going into the viewfinder. So you do have more flexibility.
Absolutely. I mean, the ports is a huge thing. Having the 2 SDIs, and the XLRs, mini XLR is great for getting things into a small camera body. But so much of what we do uses full-size XLRs. Like I'm often plugging in this microphone, for example, over XLR. I've got those little Sennheiser AVX receivers, which actually, if I cut to Mehdia for a second. There we go. Smooth and professional. I've got these little Sennheiser ones, which are XLR that literally go straight into the XLR port. So if I do that and turn the camera around, you see it literally hangs out of the XLR port. Being able to do something like that is brilliant. You know, on the C70, I've got to get a long adapter cable or go over an adapter cable to go to 3.5 millimeter rather than the locking connection. And, you know, it's just not as seamless. So that is full-size XLRs are brilliant. There's still very much a place for full-size XLRs.
Yeah, I mean, you get two on the body and then 2 additional ones, as I said, if you need to, on the expansion pack.
Yep, absolutely. CFast. Sorry, not CFast, CF Express.
CF Express, yeah.
CF Express. And if anyone at home is looking at CF Expresses, these ones, the Angelbird SE cards.
It's Type B.
So much cheaper than pretty much every other CFast card. CF Express, I need more coffee. CF Express Type B cards on the market, and they work perfectly with everything the camera does, and the R5c actually as well. But that's a big advantage over the, well, it's advantage or disadvantage depending on where you look at it. But the cost of these now is not that much more than a decent.
Oh yeah, Angelbird ones are actually cheaper.
In fact, I think it might even be cheaper per gigabyte than an SD card that is of a reasonable speed. And the offload is faster. You know, the offload speeds are quicker.
I mean, the type of memory card is what allows the camera, obviously, to go up to 120 frames in RAW. Obviously, with the SD cards, they are getting a lot better, but there is still that limitation in terms of how the amount of data that an SD card can deal with. Whereas with the CF Express cards, you can. I mean, it's if you record in RAW, it's 1 gigabits per second, which is double the C70 on the LT option. So
yeah, so it takes some decent data rates, but it is nice that we are starting to see some affordable options for what has historically been quite an expensive card that is still capable of doing all of those. Because, you know, for us in the video world, these are big data rates once you start getting up to RAW, 120 frames a second and all the rest of it. But actually, in terms of the storage side of things like that, they're not actually that crazy. All of these, particularly the higher end CF Express cards, are capable of a lot more data, which is remarkable. What else physically? We've got SDIs.
I mean, we've got the mounts, as we said, how easy it is to literally go from EF to PL.
Absolutely. Multiple menu options and controls, no matter which side of the camera you are, which I really like. A button that lights up. Got lights on, so you won't be able to see that unless it's dark in here. But all of the buttons on the side of the camera light up, which is my favorite demo trick for
easier shortcuts ready, like with the for example, with the high frame rate. So it's literally 2 buttons and you're there.
Yep.
On the C70, you can customize buttons to do different things depending on how you're using it, but these are literally ready, customized for you on the side of the camera. I think they're in a position that everyone expects them to be.
Yes.
So yeah.
Particularly if you're used to Cinemario's cameras like the C200, the original C300 or C300 Mark II. You've tweaked all of that design, but not changed it too much. So it all still feels very familiar. Very familiar. And of course the monitor. Now, when this first came out, we saw this on the C200, this sort of
It was slightly
design.
smaller version, yeah.
Yeah. It was very much a love-hate thing, this sort of bracket for the monitor. But now it's sort of been refined a little bit. It works really quite well. And I actually find myself, when I find myself picking up the C300 Mark III over the C70 when I'm doing our own work here, it's normally for one of two reasons. One is the ports. So say if I'm running wireless transmitters and stuff like that off it, which we do a lot here, I always pick up the C300. But if I'm not doing any of that, I still often pick up the C300 simply because of the monitor. Being able to get to it from any sort of angle that you might be, in weird angles around, crammed into a corner trying to get B-roll of something. It's much more flexible.
It does give you more flexibility, even to those actually use the C300 Mark II. That's why we came up with like a solution around it for people to use this screen with the C300 Mark II. So I think when the C200 came up with that, loads of people actually using the C200 love that. And luckily, obviously with the C500 first and then a C300 Mark III, they had that option with this even larger screen.
Absolutely. Barry's chimed in as well. He says he loves that you can have the monitor out, SDI out, and HDMI out all on at the same time, which is an important point. You know, it was only really the latest generations. It's certainly not only you that can do that, but it's really the latest generations of products that's become a thing, and it is really, really useful being able to just not worry about which ones you've got on or off at the same time, just being able to plug into whatever you've got and it works. Yeah,
you've got obviously the 12G SDI, you've got the monitor terminal, you've got the HDMI. Take your pick, depending on what
use
you want to
whatever
use.
configuration of them you want. Absolutely. James has put a really interesting question, actually. What is the reason for the decision to go with a 17:9 sensor rather than the more traditional 3:2 sensor and potentially open the door for OpenGate anamorphic? Or just OpenGate recording, I suppose. That's an interesting one. Do you know anything about why that decision might have been made?
No, it's not something.
It has been fed back. It's an interesting one.
Definitely an interesting question.
It's a sensor design thing, I suppose, isn't it? Do you prioritize the pixels you're actually going to use all the time, or do you allow for extra pixels that most of the time are going to be chucked away, but do give you a bit more extra real estate for anamorphic? Paramount Chief says, is the sensor really identical to the C70? I'm not sure he believes us.
It is the same sensor.
It's just the same sensor. You make the sensor, you put it in two different cameras. Yep. Same sensor. So C70 versus, so we've talked about some of the physical differences, software differences. There's less and less now, really, isn't there, after the raw
as I
updates.
said, once we added the option to record cinema raw light now on the C70, that reduced, especially when you start looking at the internal recording options. Yes, obviously the C70 does give you the option to record in MP4, which can be great for like online content, smaller files. So again, if you need that gives you that flexibility. But yeah, and then as we said, with the 300, when you can do all eye, obviously higher than 25p. So internally, very, very similar. As I said, it comes down to what you need from the camera in terms of connections, and if all eye is a must for your deliverables or not.
And build quality. I mean, there's the grip on the side, the grip that rotates as well. The C300 Mark III is definitely built better than the C70.
Yeah, I mean, depending, because that grip with an extension cable, you can actually, if you've got it for shoulder rig, you can basically reposition that, which is something that actually you can't do with the C70. It's all part of the modular design that the C300 and the 500 actually offer. So again, if that's something that you think that you're going to be doing, that will give you more flexibility again.
And mounting points. I mean, I say I often reach for the C300 Mark III when I'm using transmitters and monitors and that kind of thing. Part of that is, of course, the ports. Part of that is places to mount it. There are so many more places to mount it on a C300 Mark III. You've got the ones down the side down here. You've got multiple on the top handle. I suppose if you wanted to, you could even mount it on those
on the back as well.
back.
There are
Actually, are
options.
they 1/4 inch or are they smaller? They might be smaller.
They're smaller,
Maybe
those
you
ones.
can't mount it on those ones. But of course, there's lots of cages. It's easier to put this
Yeah.
in a cage than the C70.
I mean, the body, it's wider in a way, so it does give you more. Well, it can do more. It does offer more, and that comes obviously down to the size of the camera, and it adds to the weight. Obviously, making the camera slightly bigger to add, obviously, to give more options. Obviously, adds to the weight. And with the C70, we've gone almost like the opposite, because obviously it's trying to, with the form factor, make it easier for those upgrading from mirrorless, dishless LRs, so they get that familiar feel, but with Cinema EOS options.
Yep.
It's perfect for that. But if you need more, as I said, the 300 Mark III is still slightly smaller and lighter than the 300 II, for example. So you can still use it on a gimbal, and you can still use it on a drone, and it gives you even more flexibility if you want to use it in, like, with the expansion packs.
Absolutely. In terms of powering it, it shares the exact same batteries as the C70.
Yeah, so with the 300, you get the BPA 60.
You get
whereas with the C70, you get the 30. But then again, you get roughly about 3 hours out of a BPA 30 on a C70. And you're looking at about just over 2 hours, 2.5 hours from BPA 60 on a C300 Mark III.
So it is definitely drawing more power than the C70.
But it's still less power than, for example, with the compared to 500 Mark II, and that's thanks to the DJI sensor.
Yes.
The way it works, it basically it consumes less power. It needs less power for the camera to work.
That's interesting.
And
You
that's
would have thought
why
it would
we
need
got
more power for a DJI sensor because of the 2 out.
Because we use a single amplifier,
Aha.
which is different to other DJI
Ways that they do it.
in the market. Yeah.
Interesting. While we were talking about power, I wanted to point out this battery that I've got down here, this Swit one. This is brand new from Swit. But what I like about this, whereas the Canon ones don't have any outputs on them. They've got no D-tap or USB or anything like that. But there's a bunch on the market, obviously, that do it with D-taps. But Swit now has USB-C as well, which is pretty nice. And you can charge it over the USB-C as well. So for anyone trying to run transmitters and things like that off of Canon cameras, be it C70 or the C300 Mark III or C500 Mark II, I would definitely recommend having a little look at those, because the addition of the USB-C makes it really quite flexible now, which is great. I'm just seeing if there's any more questions. There's some quite specific ones, like CN6 says, would it be possible to add playback with the WFT adapter and browser remote? I often have the camera out of reach and it would be great to play back from the ground. I mean, I'm assuming you do. I guess we can feed that back.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we can definitely feed that back.
So let's talk a little bit about how that browser remote side of it works, and since we mentioned it there in the question. It can do all the browser remote stuff, but it needs the little adapter for it, right?
So either the wirelessly via the WFT9.
Yep.
Or via Ethernet. So you've got the two options. But I guess if you've got it out of reach, then the wireless option with the WFT9, that would be the perfect option of doing it.
Perfect. So what do you think, when people are choosing between the C70 and the C300 Mark III, what do you think the main reasons would be? So we've sort of gone through most of the reasons now. What do you think the main ones would be to go either way?
I think it's the modular design of the 300 that can basically, if that's basically useful for the type of production they're going to use it for, that tend to be, I think, one of the reasons why people would go for the 300 over the C70. It's almost, to a certain extent, what we've mentioned in terms of the connections with the 12G SDI. If you're going to need all that, then it's going to be the C300, because I think now we can see that in terms of the image quality, they are very, very similar. So if it's not the physical differences in terms of what you can do with the C300 that you can't do with the C70, and then the recording options, pushing the all-eye, for example, up to 120, then yeah, they are the two key ones, I think, that will make someone go for a 300 over the C70.
So I guess the starting point then is, like I said earlier, looking back at the work you do, starting with the C70 in your mind and thinking, will that do what I need it to do? And then if it doesn't, this camera exists. Yeah,
I mean, the C70 has been very popular. It's doing really well, as I said, especially since the firmware update that added the cinema roll light. So yeah, it's being used either as on its own as an A cam, as I said, a B cam with the C300 Mark III or the C500. Just easily match footage between different cameras. But yeah, it's the decider. What else do you need? This is, if you're happy with the C70, is that basically can it do everything that you need? If not, the C300 is basically your next best option. Obviously, or could even be a C500 depending on what else you need.
Yeah, I mean, the C500 for me tends to be about the look. You know, the C300 Mark III is the practical one, but then you look at the look of the C500 and go, right, if you want that, that's the reason to go for the C500. And it's not just about full frame versus Super 35. They have very different looks and feels to the sensor, which I think would be the main reason that people would choose the C500 over this. But I reckon for most day-to-day work, the C300 Mark III, for me, is a better choice than the C500.
It does give you more flexibility,
and flexibility, absolutely.
So even though that they both have the same pretty much body and the modular design, you get the 4K 120 on the C300, which you can't do on the C500, for example, and that can make a difference. The sensor, the DGO sensor, as we said, in terms of getting clearer images, dynamic range. So yeah, I mean, you probably have more flexibility with the 300 over the 5, but there is still obviously use for the 500. I guess it might not come.
The look. I mean, it has a beautiful look to it. It's choosing your film stock, isn't it? It's which one you want for your project.
It won't come into that decision between C300, C70. I think that's always going to be those two cameras.
Exactly. Yeah, that is a pure practical decision between those two. It's ergonomics. It's which one practically is going to do the job better for you. A bigger camera with more ports, more modularity, more options, or a smaller camera to be nice and nimble.
And testing, I would recommend for those that still not sure, is to actually get the two cameras and test them.
Of course, yep, we've got both here. I mean, so it's actually two C70s that are filming us right now. We've got these here, the C300 Mark III and a C500 Mark II and an R5c. If anyone wants to physically try them out, just come on in to the Pro AV showroom, book an appointment with us. Be more than happy to spend a bit of time talking people through them. But yeah, I think that's a lovely place to wrap it up. So thank you so much for that, Mehdia. I think it's been really insightful.
Thank you for having me, and I hope the everything that we've discussed today was useful for everyone watching us.
Absolutely. If you've got any other questions at all, leave them on. If you're watching this after the fact, just leave them in the comments on this video on YouTube, and we will be keeping an eye on them and trying to answer as many as we can get around to. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Action. Good. I need more passion. Camera up.
Turn up the heat and make those embers glow.
Beautiful.
I feel good right now. I'm on fire, I'm on fire. How much you mean?
bonfire right now.
Not just any bonfire, a bonfire.